events organized during this week on financial literacy, as this is the 2022 Global Money Week. So we are very pleased that you found the time to attend this event. The webinar will be organized in two parts. The first part will be devoted to the presentation of the new EFAMA report on investor education initiatives. The first edition of the report was published in 2014. At that time, EFAMA was among the forerunners to stress the importance of financial literacy, along with Florent Messi at the OECD, Paul Andrews at IOSCO, and Professor Anna Maria Luzardi. Since then, EFAMA has stepped up its work in this area under the auspices of its investor education platform. Publishing the new report was an important goal we set for ourselves to highlight interesting investor education initiatives taken by national associations and EFAMA corporate members, and also to encourage other organizations within the European financial sectors, banks, insurance companies, pension funds, to do the same. The report will be presented by the Vice Chair of our Investor Education Platform, Nathalie Westerbarke. Following Nathalie's presentation, there will be a panel discussion focusing on the role of the financial sector in investor education initiatives. We have brought together a group of high-level officials who have agreed to share their views on how financial services providers can contribute to investor education initiatives. The panel discussion will be moderated by Denise Voss, who is the chairperson of our investor education platform, and you will have a chance to ask questions using the chat box. To conclude, I would like to quote Commissioner McGuinness, who did us the honor of writing the preface to our report, and who stressed, I quote, "It will take cooperation from everyone involved, from both the public and the private sector, to make sure we are successful in supporting financial education for people across the EU. This is indeed our strong belief. Despite the increased awareness of the importance of financial literacy, it will take much time to achieve significant progress. It is therefore essential that we all together continue our efforts in this area, as there is pressing need to achieve tangible progress to empower citizens to make sound decisions when managing their savings. I trust you will enjoy this webinar, which I hope will encourage the launch of many new investor education initiatives in Europe. I now give the floor to Nathalie to present a new report. Nathalie, up to you.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Nathalie Westerbarke and I work for Fidelity International as Head of EU Public Policy. It's a real pleasure to be presenting the second EFAMA Investor Education Report during this launch event today in my role as Vice Chair of the EFAMA Investor Education Platform. You will see on the second side on the table of contents what I will cover 5 parts. So a short introduction, I will present the 3 parts of the report and conclude with accelerators of change on slide 2, table of contents. I will be speaking about 10 to 15 minutes and then hand over to Denise for the panel. So if we move to slide number 3, you will see in the introduction that it is really, you can take, you heard it here because the report will be posted on the EFAMA website during or just after this event. And the focus of this report is really to analyze what has changed since the first report launched in 2014 in the area of investor education. What are the lessons learned to refresh also the guidelines? And third, what are the most recent initiatives of EFAMA members, both associations and corporates? So the report starts with a foreword by the EFAMA president, Naïm Abou Jaoudeh, talking about household savings and the need to shift bank deposits into investments. It's then followed by external contributors on the slide we just see now, part 1, essential perspectives. So it includes a preface by European Commissioner McGuinness from DG FISMA, talking about the empowerment of the consumer. The 4 essential perspectives are contributions pretty much of authors that all agree that investor education initiatives are key to strengthen investor protection, and that it helps individuals to take informed savings and investment decisions and boost their confidence in capital markets. So the section also concludes an overview of EFAMA's position on investor education by Bernard Delbecq and Marin Capel. It actually includes a call for action to improve in 4 different ways. A, to gain more data and better data. Second, to enhance the materials. Third, to understand social challenge. And fourth, to create also synergy between private and public sector. So I encourage you to read the very important contributions from the authoritative views that have kindly agreed to write their thoughts about this topic in this report. We now move to slide number 5. This is the part 2 of the report. So this is the updated guidelines on investor education. And here I would like to spend a little bit more time because this is really the heart of the report, and it has 4 different parts. The first part is the context of investor education initiatives. So it is to identify the key challenges and needs in this space. And secondly, to identify existing and past initiatives. Secondly, it has a part which are the principles. There are 5 principles that are important. The first is the need to develop an investor education friendly culture, for example, by appointing investor education champions in an organization. The second is to strive for neutrality among the many different financial services products and segments that exist, for example, in banking, insurance, and asset manager products. The third is to keep it simple, the use of plain language. The fourth is to make investor education personal, fun, and interesting, so to create techniques and tools that attract and retain the attention. And fifth is to leverage the power of digitization. This means to develop online tools such as websites and calculators. The third part of the guidelines are then the action plan. So how to go about improving investor education initiatives. It's, of course, first setting the priorities, be efficient and organized. These are general recommendations. But what is important is really to identify your target audience by, for example, end investor, intermediaries, educators, and communicators. But it's also important to identify the most relevant potential partners, such as intermediaries, authorities, the press can play a key role, educators or sponsoring firms. And it's important to define the message. What are the benefits? What is really the core knowledge for the target audience? And what are product-specific messages? So it's really important, and this there are some charts also in the report that visualize these principles and the action plan itself. So the most important thing is to make sure that the messages relate to the experience, the age, and the gender of the target audience. So they need to be tailored to whomever one wants to reach with the investor education initiatives. And they need to, most importantly, also be culturally adapted, to be delivered in the language of the local market and potential other socioeconomic factors relevant to that target audience. Plus, depending on the target audience, it's also key to choose the right channels. Are these online tools? Are these information sessions, etc.? The guidelines, so this part 2 of the report, conclude with the 4th section, that is the evaluation. So it's about going, refining and improving continuously, perpetually, so the investor education initiatives that one adopts as an institution, as an association, or as a corporate, to assess what is working, what is not, to create feedback loops. So you will find in this part of the EFAMA Investor Education Report also a checklist for financial services providers. And I encourage everyone to take a look, and these guidelines really include the lessons learned since the 2014 report of the last 8 years, and what has truly changed since then. So core insights were that, of course, sustainability has accelerated, plays a key role now, with not just green finance, but also social factors that end investors and institutional investors would like to include into their investment decisions, but also the digital transition. So over the last 2 years, many households had people, everyone pretty much, most people had to work from home, large parts, and had hence to upgrade or use the digital channels. And those good, better income earners, also we've seen statistic and data around it, have used this time wisely to educate themselves on investment opportunities, and shifted more bank deposits into investments in pension savings, which is a very positive trend. So in a way, the time of the last 2 years where most people were at home, working online and spending also their spare time at home, that we saw an acceleration of digital transition and channels, which is positive for investor education. And also we see a shift towards sustainable finance, which again sets us on a good path to a more responsible form of capitalism, which is important that this is driven by the end investor and by institutional investors, and not just by the providers that offer these products. So I encourage, in the meantime, everyone also to remember to put in your questions in the chat box, which we will then address in the Q&A. And I will now move on to the third part of the report, which is slide 6. So on this third part of the report, you can see we have included also an annex of no less than 46 initiatives that were undertaken by the 18 national associations and corporate members. The initiatives are widely ranging in terms of audience, contents, and delivery. I will get back to that in a little bit. And you can see that our report is really divided by 2 types of contributions. So we had one part which focuses on national association contributions. You can see on the slide that we had received 10 contributions from local markets, including from Austria, from Belgium, from France, from Germany, from Luxembourg, Portugal, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, and UK. So within these case studies that they delivered for the local markets, you can see what has worked culturally in the local market best, what have the asset management associations undertaken in order to help promote investor education locally in these countries. Moving on to the next slide, you would see a list of contributions by corporate members, and they differ significantly. There are some themes that we've picked up that again play a key role: sustainability, digital, some of them, and these are just samples, of course. We know that there are many initiatives by corporate members who have not submitted a contribution. So one can also, through the internet, visit the websites of the EFAMA corporate members and learn more about contributions and initiatives and ways to go about investor education beyond this report. So moving on to the next slide, I will now present 3 slides that summarize the contributions by target audience, content, and delivery channels. So on slide 9, we will see a pie chart that shows with regards to target audience, about 90% of investor education initiatives focus on the top 3 target audiences, which are A, half of them focus on the retail investors. The second largest group is students, with about 25% of target audience. And the third focuses, you can see the purple part of the pie chart is investment professionals, about 15%. So these are individuals that work already or would like to work more in a professional way in investment management. But what is interesting to see again is that half of the initiatives really are addressed to the retail space, which makes sense because we have in another EFAMA report also shown that there is still more to do with regards to shifting bank deposits into investments and pension savings. So it is logical that half of the target audience would be retail. Moving to the next slide, number 10. We now see here a pie chart that shows in terms of content that almost 3/4 of investor education initiatives focus on general concepts, financial products, and pension savings. So the general concepts are almost 35%. And I guess they cover things like what is inflation, how does inflation potentially also change and accelerate with the current situation that we live through today. And the second most biggest part here is the blue part, which is 24%, which covers other initiatives and financial products. So financial products constitute about 20%. And pension savings is a key theme in terms of content as well. It's of course a long-term goal for many people, especially young savers. They don't necessarily think about pensions early on enough, although they should. They focus more on the investment side. But that's why it's important that we see here 17% of the investor education initiatives addressed to pensions, because this is really an area where we would encourage young savers to start early, think about their retirement. But naturally, there's a need, therefore, to raise more awareness, because many, it's human nature, perhaps we postpone it to a later date when we have more time. And that's, of course, an error, because we need to think about our life after working life as soon as possible. We can also see a small part of the pie chart, which is green, on sustainable finance. This has been growing. And there's been a trend also which suggests that we need to move more strongly towards sustainability literacy. So not just financial literacy, which is the content that addresses here the light blue part, others. So financial literacy, understanding compounding interest rates, but also to make it more specific in terms of sustainability. So sustainability literacy could be the next era of financial literacy as well. Moving on to slide number 11. So this is a pie chart that shows the case studies percentage of delivery channels of investor education initiatives. We see 40% of channels are e-lessons. So this is the purple part of the chart, and the other large chunk is the yellow one, the website. So this is 35% of delivery channels used by institutions are websites and e-lessons. There's a small part that is the dark blue, which is 15%, which is still delivered through brochures or e-brochures, so more traditionally. But overall, I'd like to, at this point, conclude with the overview of this third part of the investor education report and move on to what's actually changed, what have been the accelerators for change, as the last slide of my presentation. So we can see that there were several accelerators when we look at all the case studies, but most importantly, there were 5 that stand out as themes or as trends that show the direction, but also the urgency of undertaking investor education initiatives. The first is the Capital Market Union, the second, sustainable investing, third, digitalization, fourth, pandemic, and the fifth is the pension challenge. So I'd like to highlight a couple of quotes from the contributors that we have, the external contributors we've had in the first part of the report, whereby Commissioner McGuinness emphasizes in the context of the capital market unions that empowering the consumer through knowledge is truly important. With regards to sustainable investing, the IOSCO Secretary General focuses here on sustainability literacy. In his contribution, we have third on the digitalization, where the ESMA Executive Director Natasha Casenave highlights the risk of financial exclusion through growth of digitalization. Fourth, the OECD in the context of the pandemic, and we will have a panelist later who will elaborate on that, shows that individuals and households need to enhance preparedness against shocks. We've seen various shocks over the last, well, just recently this year, but also through the pandemic and before, so it's important to prepare for that. And the fifth is pension challenge. Better finance here brings in the consumer perspective and the importance of pension savings. So the slides will be shared with the participants. And again, if you have any questions, please raise them during this whole session through the chat room, and we will pick up your questions in the Q&A box and we'll address them at the end of the session. So thank you very much to everyone for listening and for joining us today. I now hand over to the chair of the EFAMA Investor Education Platform, Ms. Denise Voss. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for taking us through the highlights of the second EFAMA report on investor education initiatives. And I would like to just take a moment to thank all of the members of the EFAMA Investor Education Platform, as well as Bernard and Marin, for all of the great work you did in producing the second edition. Of course, thank you to all the contributors. But before welcoming our four panelists, I'd just like to take a quick moment just to actually salute EFAMA for being formally focused on investor education and financial education since 2012 with the creation of the Investor Education Working Group that I had the honor to chair. And of course, this led to the launch in 2014 of the first edition of the EFAMA report on investor education initiatives. And I'm sure Bernard will agree with me that the tone was different in 2014 compared to where we are today, which is really today we have a general consensus in the public and private sectors that financial literacy is a fundamental life skill that European citizens, obviously all global citizens should have, but European citizens should have, beginning already from a young age. And as mentioned, this is really about empowerment of citizens. There's still, of course, much to do and not much time to do it in, although, of course, it's important to recognize that financial literacy, financial education, investor education, it is all about, it's a long-term proposition and exercise. But of course, today, the overall theme of today's session is one that we haven't actually spent that much time speaking about in the past, but it is critically important to have all actors participating in the contribution to increasing financial literacy and education. And I know there are many of you from both the public and private sectors attending, and I would ask the private sector attendees in particular to listen carefully. Thank you very much. So thank you to all of our panelists. Each panelist will spend 10 minutes taking us through the lens of what their organization is doing in respect of financial education, and in particular, again, how the private sector can and should contribute. So first up is Mr. Marcel Haag, who is Director General at DG FISMA of the European Commission, and he will take us through how the private sector could contribute to the success of the EU OECD Financial Competence Framework. Marcel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. Thank you, Bernard, for having me at this very interesting panel. And good morning to all. Now, let me start by stressing that for the European Commission, it is vital that Europeans have the knowledge to make decisions that are in their financial interests and that help them safeguard their financial futures. As we all know, today, unfortunately, levels of financial literacy in the European Union, as almost everywhere else, are regrettably low. And this disproportionately affects the most vulnerable in society. If we want an economy in the EU that works for people, and that is the ambition of the European Commission, an economy that is inclusive, empowering, and resilient, it is essential to invest into and make progress with financial education. Improving financial education is a win-win for consumers and industry alike. For prospective investors, better financial literacy will help them understand their own needs, set goals, and seek out the right products. It will allow them to better understand the information provided to them in the form of disclosures and seek adequate advice when necessary. The industry will benefit from a broader customer base that is more informed about what's on offer, more confident in engaging with capital markets, also ensuring that financial advice is more effective in delivering better services and outcomes for customers. Now, with the financial competence framework for adults in the European Union, we have created a shared understanding of financial competencies for adults across the European Union. Designed for adults aged 18 years and over, it defines key financial literacy competence areas, for example, planning a budget, investing, and borrowing. This was a joint effort together with the OECD and was also done in close cooperation with the member states. The framework will support the development, implementation, and update of national financial literacy strategies and support the design of financial education programs and tools. And it will also facilitate the assessment of financial literacy levels and the evaluation of financial literacy initiatives. The framework sets out the knowledge, skills, and attitude that individuals need to have in order to be financially literate. A common framework means that we can develop a common understanding of financial literacy and how we can improve it across the European Union. Our goal is that member states, educational institutions, industry, and individuals will voluntarily use this framework to develop policies, financial literacy programs, and educational material. A key feature of this framework is its flexibility. Users can pick out the most relevant competences for a given audience. As a shared point of reference, this framework will support the exchange of good practices between member states and other key stakeholders, including the industry. Part of the 2020 Capital Markets Union Action Plan, the framework can help boost retail investors' participation in capital markets based on an enhanced understanding and trust. Now, the finalization of the EU OECD International Network on Financial Education, Financial Competence Framework for Adults was only the beginning. Now, in a next step, we will relate to the dissemination and facilitation of the uptake of the framework amongst member states and all types of stakeholders, industry included, through in particular targeted exchanges that we want to launch in the course of this year. As I already mentioned, the framework can help policymakers, NGOs, educational institutions, public or private, and the industry to design financial education policies and measures. Stakeholder participation is, in our view, fundamental. for this step, as the stakeholders are the ones that will be actively implementing financial literacy measures and exchange ideas amongst themselves. Now, more specifically, our framework can help stakeholders support the design of financial education programs and the development of financial education learning materials and tools. It could also support the inclusion of financial education in curricula for higher education institutions, inform the design of teachers' adult trainings, and support learning materials and programs specifically designed to help financially vulnerable groups. It could also underpin the setup of private or public awareness-raising campaigns. We value the experience of EFAMA in the area of investor education and would warmly encourage the European asset management industry as a whole to use this new framework for their own initiatives in the area of financial education. This could take the shape of fitness checks for existing financial literacy programs or the development of new ones with a specific focus on sustainable or digital topics, for example. We also want these ideas to be shared. EFAMA's report makes an important contribution here by presenting a wealth of ideas and initiatives from its members. The report shows that we need the industry's creativity and customer reach to advance on this complex subject. The Commission, for its part, will contribute to an exchange of good practices and lessons learned among policymakers and stakeholders. This will improve the uptake and foster coordinated efforts regarding financial literacy. So let me conclude by stressing that the Common Financial Competence Framework should be a game changer in tackling low levels of financial literacy in the EU. However, the framework is not a goal in itself. Financial literate citizens across the European Union is. For this to happen, we need to see widespread adoption of the financial competence framework for adults, and the participation of all stakeholders, including industry, will be fundamental in raising adult financial literacy levels throughout the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcel. Appreciate that very much. And it's true that it's an extremely good point to point out that this is about a competency framework for adults, right? And it's true that from a financial education perspective, sometimes, or literacy perspective, sometimes we forget that aspect. The adults need it as well. And we often focus on school and the youth, which is of course vitally important as well. But it's true that adults need it as much or even more, given they're closer to retirement, if you will. And including, of course, in the workplace, as well as from a personal pension perspective. So thank you very much. So we move on now to one of the contributors of the framework, a representative from the OECD, Ms. Kiara Montegos, Senior Policy Analyst, and she'll take us through what is the role of financial service providers at the national strategy, in the national strategies for financial education promoted by the OECD and INFI. Thank you very much, Kiara.
Thank you very much, Denise, for the introduction, and thanks to the organizers for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to join this webinar, as I've done in the past with other webinars. So let me start by, first of all, before going into the subject of our discussion today, let me just briefly mention that all that I will talk about today is really the work, is really a collective effort, and it's based on the work of the OECD International Network on Financial Education, which is a network of public authorities, mostly central banks, ministries of finance, and financial regulators from around the world, so much broader than OECD membership, who get together regularly to discuss about issues related to financial literacy and education, including the collection of financial literacy data, the development of policy guidance and policy instruments on financial literacy and education, and to develop reports and analysis of issues that can support the implementation of policies. And I will give a few examples shortly. And let me also mention that the OECD INFE coordinates and organizes the Global Money Weekend, which is happening this week. So I'm particularly happy to see that this event was also organized under Global Money Week. So thanks very much to the organizers for this. So the main policy instrument and also reference point for the work that the OECD and the INFE do on financial literacy is a recommendation on financial literacy that was adopted by OECD governments and other countries that have adhered afterwards. That was adopted in 2020, and that really brings together everything that the OECD INFE has learned over the last 10, 15 years on how to develop financial literacy policies and programs. And I have already had the occasion of explaining what is the content of this recommendation regarding investor education in previous EFAMA webinars, so I will not spend time on this today, but I would rather focus on the topic of today's discussion, which is the role of the private sector and financial service providers in financial education. So let me start by acknowledging that the private sector and financial service providers have a great role to play, of course, in financial education. They have, of course, key expertise on financial topics. They have the proximity to the consumers. They have direct contact to consumers, retail investors, and so on. So they have really a wide reach. They often have resources that they can devote to financial education efforts. And in many cases, they do have a business case themselves for providing financial education. However, we also need to acknowledge that there are a number of challenges around the participation of the private sector in financial education. Of course, there can be conflicts of interest that cannot be denied. Of course, the private sector are profit-making organizations, while financial education messages are typically oriented towards consumers rather than towards the profits of the companies releasing these messages. So this needs to be taken into account. In some cases, there can be issues of equity in terms of reaching the consumers who would need the messages the most, who are not necessarily the most profitable consumers, or consumers such as young people who can, to some extent, provide loyalty to some brands over time. There can be issues around coordination and also around the evaluation of financial education initiatives. So how can these challenges be addressed? Of course, there are ways of overcoming and addressing these challenges, and possibly one of the most relevant ways of taking this into account and making sure the contribution of all stakeholders works to the benefit of all is the development of national strategies. So this is one of the core aspects of the work of the INFE, and is really something that we have seen that has allowed countries to progress enormously over time in the development of financial literacy policies and programs. So I don't need to go into the details, but national strategies are really coordinated approaches and efforts to make sure that all the relevant stakeholders in a country work to develop financial literacy policies and programs towards common goals. and in a coordinated way to the benefit of consumers. So what can be the role of the private sector in national strategies and in financial education more broadly? So first of all, it is very important that the private sector can contribute effectively to the development and implementation of national strategies. They have a key role. We see that in many countries, they do have a key role in, first of all, the development, but then especially the implementation of strategies and policies, and they can give great support to the public sector in enacting these policies. However, it's really important that this is done in ways that mitigate the conflicts of interest that I mentioned before. And for instance, channeling efforts through industry associations is a very important way to preserve the reputation and to make the distinction clearer between potentially commercial and educational messages. So in this sense, of course, the initiatives of EFAMA are extremely welcome, and they do go in the good direction of channeling efforts through industry associations. Many national strategies also have developed guidelines or criteria for the participation of the private sector in financial education by setting objectives around impartiality, quality, fairness, and so on for the participation of private actors in financial education. So following these guidelines or creating voluntary codes of conduct, which is also to some extent the direction that EFAMA is taking. This is again a very good way to make sure that all the relevant parties are working together in a way that preserves the reputation and the high quality of everybody's efforts. And of course, these criteria or codes of conduct should be inspired to criteria of impartiality, objectivity, quality, and fairness, as I have said, so that efforts are really centered towards the needs of the consumers. And last but not least, I wanted to mention another way in which the contribution of the private sector can become even more effective. I will not go into the details because, of course, Director Haag has already explained very well what this is about, but I wanted to mention that the Financial Competence Framework for Adults in the EU that was recently published by the European Commission and the OECD is a great tool that can be used to foster coordination, to ensure that messages are coherent and consistent. And as you will certainly know, it includes dedicated parts on issues that are particularly relevant to investor education, such as the digitalization of finance. There are specific sections about investments and especially on sustainable finance, which, as I've seen from the presentation of your report, is indeed an area of great interest for EFAMA members. So to conclude, we have recently launched a call of expression of interest, so to learn who is planning or already using this framework, because we are interested to know and to identify front runners in the use of the framework. So I can put the chat to this, in the link to this short call of expression of interest in the chat. So if anyone in the audience would like to let us know how you plan to use the framework, we are very interested to know. And with this, I will conclude and I will look forward to the discussion that will follow. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Kiara, for that very much. And thank you for putting that in the chat. I think that's a fantastic idea, is to take advantage of us all being together and as you rightly say, to see who is using the framework and to incite others to use it. I think your points about the national strategy it's so fundamentally important that people understand, I'd say, the power of a national strategy for financial literacy in terms of being efficient and effective, joining all of the resources together. And as you say, helping to resolve, hopefully, some of the challenges that the private sector has in participating in financial education initiatives. So thank you very much. So our next panelist is Mr. Salvatore Nigrode, who is CEO of JA Europe, and he will be speaking about what are the views of youth organizations in relying on the financial sector to promote financial education amongst students and young adults. Salvatore, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise, and thank you, Bernard and EFAMA, for having me today, for giving us the opportunity to share our views on the role of the financial sector and the civil sector more broadly to support the next generations of Europeans. So, first of all, a few words about junior achievement for those of you who might not know us. Don't ask us to build roads or buildings or something different, because for 100 years, we only focused on three things: financial literacy, work readiness, and entrepreneurship. And today we are the largest organization who provides educational programs across 43 European countries. And we prepare the young people to actually succeed in the global economy, and a vision award where every young people have the skill set and the mindset to build thriving communities. We are a member of JA Worldwide, and we operate in over 110 countries across the globe. So for 100 years, we focused on financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and work readiness. And just this year, we've been nominated to the Nobel Peace Prize because probably they believe, as we do, that unemployment and poverty have always led to political and economic instability, creating more gaps. So by economically empowering youth on all continents, JA has always served as a conduit for stability, prosperity, and peace. But why are we here, and why for us, we see that financial education is so important and is so relevant for the generations of today and the generation to come. So as the EFAMA report clearly shows, a lot of progress has definitely been done over the last few years. More and more countries have adopted and rolling out national strategies. More industry players are initiating and engaging in financial literary activities, but there still exists a huge gap among countries, and especially a huge gap in when including financial literacy in the educational systems and when preparing the young people at a very early age. And they will soon gonna make financial decisions. So it's so fundamentally important that they have not only the relevant information, the relevant skills and relevant capability. To give you an example, as we're speaking it right now, JA Europe is organizing this week activities, the Global Money Week, involving thousands and thousands of students, but also volunteers from the private sector. In this moment, as we're speaking, we have Arrow Global, Bloomberg, BNP Paribas, Personal Finance, Mitsubishi UFG Financial Group that are helping teenagers aged 15 to 18 years old to better understand how to manage their money, how to plan, and to be able to respond to any challenges that will be in front of them, but also understand broadly the financial sector. And why not consider a career in the financial industry? So this is just one of the different examples of collaborations in which we're taking the financial sector directly into the schools, because we believe that content is important, but the experiential learning is fundamental. When you bring the private sector together with educators, and in Europe we work with over 150,000 teachers that we pair with 100 business volunteers to give the sense of what is expecting for young people when they finish the educational path and they enter the job market, or when they start their own company. So the support of the financial sector is very welcome, and any of you is in this webinar would like to contact us and participate in our activities, engage your employees in participating in our activities in these 43 countries across Europe, more than happy to have you. But let me stress three challenges that we need to really tackle together. The first one is the financial skills gap. We still see that many young people across Europe are not equipped with the key financial skills that they need. And they are soon starting their working life. They're soon going to take sound financial decision, but only half of EU countries have some form of national strategy in place in the countries where we serve. In addition, it's really the skills that are taught, the skills that they need. So future employees and entrepreneurs are perceived to need a different subset of financial skills that what young people have then when they leave the schools and they enter into workforce. There is a significant importance of analytics and mathematics that is important for employees or employers, a need of business acumen, administration, management for young entrepreneurs. So we still see that, and many agree that financial planning and budgeting are still essential skills that need to be reinforced into the schools. So the financial skills gap. Then we associated the digital skills gap. Financial management is increasingly happening through digital, which means that we need to tackle the financial literacy in combination with the digital capability. And we need to help children to build also their digital life, their digital portfolio, understand what is good and what is not good. Sometimes they look at it as a game. It's gamification of programs is important, definitely, but we need to make sure that every decisions that they make is supported with the knowledge on why they're taking that decision, also in the digital space when it is related to financial. So technology and innovation are changing not only the way people and young people think about money and manage their personal finance, but also the way financial education is and will need to be delivered. We can't just put out there a PDF that we expect that the young people are going to learn as it was in a book. It's not. You need to gamify, you need to make that experience for the young people to be attractive. Their attention span is changing, the way they're learning, they're changing, the way they're applying this learning is changing. Same is for financial education. We can't just build so many platforms and seeing out there in which people put a PDF and expect that people read. That's not anymore what the young people are used will learn. The last but not least is definitely probably the social gap, especially if you look at the gender gap in financial literacy. It's a persistent problem, and we are focusing significantly on engaging young girls by giving them examples. We just had a fantastic program with Bloomberg just this week across the globe. But also let's make sure that no one is left behind, because there are some group of societies and group of youth, especially after COVID-19, the gap has been widened, and they do need to be financially resilient, and they are unfortunately financially fragile. So our focus is especially on that. Now, with this challenge in mind, these three challenges, so the financial skills gap, the digital skills gap, the social gap, I like also to provide a little bit of three solutions. The first one is to start early. So the earlier the children understand the role of money, how to handle it, how to be responsible. I have a 5 and 7 years old at home. They're my kids. And it's so important. We see the early we start, the more savvy they are, the more they will be able to make financially sound decision as they grow. The other one is keep up with the latest. Keep up with the latest. There are many new tools, concepts, services, actors, and young people need to be supported in understanding what are those tools. No, many others, for instance, are clueless about cryptocurrencies and cannot support their children to make sound financial decision. So it has to be a joint educational path for both parents and children. And the other one is combine skills and capability. So we're talking today, also the previous speakers, about financial skills, but we also need to move beyond the simple knowledge. We need to ensure that young people have the financial capability, which is the focus, for instance, of our partnership with HSBC. Financial capability is the combination of attitude, knowledge, skills, and self-efficacy that is needed to make sustainable money management decisions. Now, to do so, we need financial inclusion and give appropriate financial mechanisms to those young people to make sure that their energy, their positiveness, their hope for the future is not wasted. So thank you so much. I'll be happy to be contacted by any of you who would like to be engaged in our initiative. Look forward to any questions. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you so much, Salvatore. Really great. Lots of great sound bites, I would say, but obviously that's a good substance, of course, but the financial skills gap, digital skills gap, and then as you rightly say, that social gap where financial skills can help to close the gap. So thank you very much, and congratulations on your nomination. So we move on to our last speaker, certainly last but not least, and it's Mr. Charles Banast, who is Deputy Director for Financial Education at the Banque de France. And he will speak about what kind of cooperation is there in France. So we have an example of what's happening in one national strategy for financial education. So what kind of cooperation is there in France between the authorities and the private financial sector to promote financial education? Charles, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise, and thanks to Bernard for inviting us to this panel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I will divide my presentations in two parts. First, a presentation of the French strategy and its governance, including national industry associations, which represents the private sector. Secondly, presentation of different devices for youth and general public, which includes contribution of national industry associations and private sector through some of these devices. We can move now to the next slide, please. The French National Committee for Financial Education, that we call en français Comité Stratégique, was established in 2016. It brings together relevant administration and institutions, consumer associations, and finance sector professionals. In France, the finance private sector is represented through national industry associations, among them the French Banking Federation, which represents commercial banks, the French Insurance Federation, which represents private insurance companies, the French Asset Manager Associations, which represent asset managers, Association for Specialized Credit Institutions, and Advisory Professional Association. Through the contribution of National Industry Association, we clearly ensure that there is no promotion of own commercial products or services when implementing financial education. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that private sector has no contribution, but the contribution is through action of the Federation. I will elaborate it later through concrete examples. The committee gives a political impetus at the very highest level. Banque de France is responsible for steering the French financial education strategy. We play the role of conductor for the strategy in order to mobilize and coordinate the activities of all stakeholders and train as many people as possible. We can move now to the next slide, please. Thank you. The Banque de France has developed a specific internet portal to give information to the general public and specific devices for young people. We give neutral and educational information on various topics, among them budget, book accounts, payments means, savings, and so on. To be very frank with you, I have to say that our scope is very large, and we do not give priority on capital markets or financial systems. Savings is one topic among several ones. We can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. We try to start financial education as early as possible in schools colleges and universities. We organize educational sessions or activities for students, having as main goal the promotion of the importance of managing a personal budget, find the good balance between revenues and expenses. We explain them that using payment means in a secure way is crucial, and that savings money allows benefits. What we try to explain to young people is saving provides a financial backstop for uncertainty, and saving will allow you to finance part of a future project on the medium term or on the long term, just as study financing, car purchase, vacation, house, and even retirement. Then we can move to this. Thank you. In France, President Macron implemented the Service National Universel, a kind of national civic services for 15 and 16 years old. This is a 2-week training to learn basic skills, among them defense, citizenship, environment protection, and financial education. So far, it is a volunteer participation of students. Nevertheless, the first sessions were quite successful. We reached about 14,000 young people in 2021, and we should train 50,000 young people in 2022, spread over 200 centers through the territory. We have developed a specific device for financial education session. This is an education escape game called Sur la piste de Mathieu. Each student investigates on the financial tracks on Mathieu, who disappeared. Through the game, you can discover different themes such as budget, bank accounts, payment means, insurance, savings, credit, financial scams. The game ends with a quiz to be sure that students have acquired knowledge. With regards to savings, we try to explain to children that savings provides a financial backstop for uncertainty. Saving will allow you to finance part of future project on the medium term or the long term, the risk-return ratio, and it's important to start saving even small amounts as soon as possible. We can move to the next slide, please. To reach 50,000 students within 2 weeks, we welcome volunteers from the private sector, which come as game leaders to help students solve the enigma and to correct the quiz and explain it necessary. Volunteers represent the National Industry Federation of the profession. They do not introduce themselves as a private company, but as a member of a National Industry Association of Federation, to be sure that there is no promotion of a commercial product or service. The private company of some volunteers encourage their participation as they consider financial education a core component of their private corporate social responsibility. Then you can move to the next slide. Thank you. As I said before, we have developed an internet portal to give neutral and educational information to the general public. This is an internet portal called My Questions of Money, Mes Questions d'Argent. Through that portal, you find tips to manage money more wisely. You find answers to your day-to-day financial questions. The internet portal brings information from diverse sources. I mean that we do not write articles directly. We select the best articles, the best guides, the best videos, the best explanation from diverse sources. This information is always neutral, pedagogical, and without any commercial connotation. In France, AFG, which represents the asset manager industry, has published a guide with 12 principles for saving and investing medium and long-term investing solutions. The guide received the label EduCFI meaning that the guide is neutral, educational, without any commercial recommendation. The guide is referenced inside the portal, so many people can consult the guide. Then we can move to the last slide, thank you. This guide of the association in France is the voice of the French asset managers' private sector. It can guide you on the way to invest to fit your needs, because the approach must be based on how well you define your situation and personal skills. This was the last slide. And finally, I would like to say that we fully share the views expressed in the new EFAMA report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you. It's really important to be able to see how a national strategy is set up and how it works and how it can incorporate the private sector. And I think I think we could see from what you said that a national strategy such as you have in France, it's a means of delivering expertise via a neutral means, to help with the goal of increasing financial literacy. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So thank you. So we move on now to the panel session. Please do ask your questions. I believe a recording of this webinar will be made available. I see that one question in the chat. So Natalie will join us as a representative from the private sector. So be able to put forward her views and experiences for the private sector. And I guess maybe before starting, I'd like to just mention that, remind everyone this is, and I think it served well as a call for action. We've been calling for action for a long time, but I think it's getting louder and louder and more hearing. So it's very, very positive. Perhaps if I could ask a first question, and it might sound a little strange because I'm talking about the end, but I think one of the challenges for national strategies for investor education initiatives, financial education initiatives, is how do you evaluate whether they work? And of course, one of the challenges with this topic is the long time we have in terms of the framework for investor education, financial education. Maybe you only see the result when somebody's ready to retire. So that is one of the challenges. So if I could ask that question to the panelists, what are some of the ideas of how do we measure and evaluate whether a particular initiative is working? And maybe Charles, maybe we could start with you, given you just explained to us some of the national strategies in France.
Thank you. Okay, to evaluate the impact of the strategy, we in all the devices that we use for the strategy, we always put some quiz before and after every devices. So it's a mean to know if at the time when we do the action, if people have acquired some knowledge. But for the long term, it's I know it's more difficult. I think the way is to make some I lose my words, some enquête,
some surveys, perhaps.
Survey, yes. Thank you. Some surveys every 3 years. We make a survey to evaluate what is the impact on the knowledge of our citizens.
Okay, good. Oh, that's good. Good, because I know that this is a challenge for many.
Yeah.
Salvatore, perhaps some of the initiatives that JA Europe is running. How do you measure the impact of those?
The world of finance, the world of businesses has always told us this dilemma, right? You want a CEO that brings you quarterly results immediately, or you want someone who's growing your company in the long term, making it sustainable and provide the support to the community. It's the same as for financial education. There are things that are quick learning and can be assessed. We have fantastic assessment tools that we have developed. One of these is the entrepreneurial skills pass that we did with the European Commission, right? It tells immediately skills, capabilities, enhancement of young people. Then there are programs that instead measure behavioral changes, because financial decisions are strictly related also with behavioral changes, financial behaviors that an individual can take. And JA is not an organization that just look at one-time intervention. We start programs with kids at 5 years old and we end at 29 years old. So we have 280 programs that are locally adapted and follows a path for young people from primary school to post universities, or for people who also drop out of schools and they find themselves in this awkward situation which is becoming a need. Someone who's not studying, someone who's not in employment, someone who's not in training. So the other one is about impact investments, impact evaluations. Impact evaluation are costly. Let me start with that, especially if you want the results in 5 years. Those one are pretty costly because you need to create a good randomized control group, make sure that is possible to compare it with those one who went through your programs, those one who did not go through your programs, but they live in the same social economic situation, they have in the same kind of schools, gender, age, all these factors. And then you need to be able to follow those two groups for, a significant amount of time. What is the issue? Is that many, especially if we look at the donors community, they would like to say, okay, to an NGO like ours is, okay, I would like to finance a financial program for this year because I have budget for this year as a grant to you. So give me how many people you trained, how much they performed, and what they did this year. Nobody is really putting funding in, okay, this year plus the next 5 years of following up with those people. So that's a huge dilemma, and it's a huge weight that organizations like us have on their shoulders, because we know how important it is. We're putting our own resources into doing it for the next 5 years. But unfortunately, as we said at the beginning, there is always this paradox. I want to have the immediate results now. I want to show to the board of my foundation, I want to show to my shareholders of my companies that I'm providing that X amount of learning experience to all those people, and not, hey, 5 years ago, I did that programs, and now those are the long-term results.
Okay, thank you, Salvatore. Thank you for those practical aspects of evaluation, and not an easy topic. But perhaps if I could actually ask a question directly to you, Marcel. Thank you very much. It's really it's a question we received. We're very, very pleased and obviously really impressed with the strong commitment of the Commission to encourage financial education initiatives. And do you feel that member states are as well already giving greater importance to financial education initiatives versus the past? So has there been a more of a take up on the member state side in these initiatives?
Yeah, I think member states do. I think increasingly member states realize that we are at a point where we see a disruptive change in the financial industry and financial literacy, and you quite rightly mentioned digital literacy as an important prerequisite for being financial literate at this point. So we see a very fast innovation in the financial industry, and which requires to pay more attention to financial literacy if we do not want to leave large parts of the population behind. So member states, I sense, that's the feedback that we get, are increasingly realizing that at this point in time, financial literacy is developing financial literacy, supporting financial literacy improving financial literacy is more important than ever. So
that's good. That's encouraging. And obviously, the EU OECD framework for the competency framework is of course a big step, a very important step in the direction of encouraging member states to implement national strategies and initiatives as well.
And by the way, we also think that whilst the framework is not an evaluation framework, it can help developing an evaluation and assessment framework by conceptualizing financial literacy and providing clear definitions. So we think that we are also contributing to evaluation efforts by, for instance, facilitating the development of indicators and making sure that also we can achieve some comparability between, the outcomes of different initiatives.
Okay, thank you. No, always an extremely important point. We all need to be using the same terminology to mean the same thing. So thank you. Kiara, I saw you nodding your head, which is completely understandable. So thank you. I mean, you have a comment about the evaluation element, and I think we also have another question for you afterwards. So.
Yes, thanks. No, I was nodding because I agree that the framework can be a great tool for supporting evaluation and measurement more generally, and that was what it was intended for, in addition to supporting policies and programs more generally. Now, regarding evaluation, that is certainly an excellent point and one that is often overlooked. So thank you, Denise, for bringing it up in the conversation. Of course, there are two angles, at least two angles to evaluation. One is the evaluation of the national strategies, but also the evaluation of the programs that go within the national strategies. And I agree with Salvatore that the evaluation of programs is something that is challenging and certainly costly if we want to do it in a rigorous way. And he mentioned randomized control trials, which are certainly the best way of really nailing down impact. However, I would not be discouraged. Just because it's challenging, it doesn't mean it cannot be done. I mean, many organizations are doing it, and in a sense, national strategies do offer a good way of somehow lessening the short-term focus that is true many organizations have. National strategies offer a framework for thinking about financial literacy over, I would not say the long term, but at least the medium term. They are usually framed around maybe 5-7 years. So the idea is to have a sufficiently long horizon to allow initiatives to not needing to focus on the very short term. And I should say that we have also recently published a report on the evaluation of national strategies. I will use again the opportunity of the chat to share the link if anyone is interested. But I think that the private sector and financial service providers here have a great opportunity. As far as I know, we have not seen a lot of private sector financial education programs being evaluated. So they could start by evaluating their own programs themselves, but also by providing resources through national strategies, as I was mentioning before, for the evaluation of other programs being done by the strategy. And I can tell you there are lots of eager researchers out there in certainly all EU countries, but also more broadly, who would love to work on evaluating financial education programs if there were resources. So I think, again, national strategies offer a good opportunity for bringing all these parties together and trying to make efforts materialize so that we can know more about the actual impact of programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, and I know there are some organizations in the private sector who have foundations, so that sounds like a good target for a foundation, which is obviously focusing on long term as well. And I think it could be. I have to say, what struck me in a few of the comments of your presentations, it's also an opportunity as well. An incentive and an opportunity for the private sector to explain what they do to citizens, to the young. I think, Salvatore, you mentioned that as well. I mean, we need talent in the financial sector for the future, and it's I think perhaps harder and harder to make that sound like something that a young person might want to do. So it is an opportunity. Natalie, is there anything that you wanted to? I'll come back to you, Kiara, but Natalie, is there anything you wanted to add in terms of evaluations?
Absolutely. Thank you, Denise. I would definitely want to add something on evaluation and measurement. I think for us as a private sector provider, we can of course measure, for example, the clicks on the website if we launch it, because with the digital tools, you also have some type of statistical measurability of how many views a certain page had, or a video or a PDF. But that alone isn't enough, because what is important is that we move from investor knowledge to the action. So this is the critical step, that we incentivize the savers to take the first step. And as Salvatore mentioned, this experimental learning is essential. So we can measure that, of course, by the growth of new assets inflow into the funds, but we don't necessarily always can break it down to the retail source. So we need to make sure we reach all pockets of society. It's going back to the financial inclusion point, and not just focus on the already academically educated, which brings me to a second very important point on the fact that it should be fun for especially young people to learn about investor education, financial literacy, but I would actually suggest it should go beyond. There's a difference between having fun through learning and having a motivation, because a motivation is sometimes more long-term and also gets us through sometimes when things aren't so much fun or always entertaining. Goes also back to the fact that we have a shorter attention span, especially from young savers, and we need to overcome that. And that motivation, which is a bit deeper than just the fun, we can create by highlighting the necessity to invest, by averting a risk of poverty in later life, for example, or by stimulating the fact that investments can have an impact. If young people and savers generally, also the adult mature ones, invest in corporates that are sustainable and they can have a difference in the world we live in, they realize they can actually have an impact with their money to move it from the deposits into investing. And I think that's an angle we need to further develop. So the deeper motivation, the urgency, the necessity, and the impact, the meaning that the investment can have on larger society. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Maybe just wrapping up, we actually are running out of time, and I really appreciate all your efforts, and I have to thank you all for keeping to 10 minutes in your presentations. It was very impressive. But I'd like to perhaps give each of you just a moment, 30 seconds or so, just for a final comment to the audience, and maybe in particular to the private sector participants today. So who would like to start? Perhaps Marcel, you could start.
Yeah, I can start. Obviously, the European Commission's efforts are constrained by the competencies that we have in this field. We will not be able to establish a very prescriptive framework, but we can facilitate the exchanges and mutual learning, not only between the member states, public authorities, but also between the public and private sectors, and that's what we are trying to do, with the help and building on the incredible expertise of of the OECD in that field. And we want to continue. We want to continue on this path by also now extending the work to younger people and develop a similar framework. There it will simply take a bit more time because the preparatory work that we can build on is a lot smaller. And I saw, and let me perhaps conclude by this. I saw a question on conflicts of interest here. I think for us, what is important is that we think that it is in the enlightened self-interest of the private sector to have financially well-educated and financial literate customers. And then, of course, it will be up for public authorities to make sure that we have a high level of investor protection and that we ensure market integrity.
Thank you, Marcel.
That area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kiara, quick word, since we only have less than a minute left.
Yes, so I will just quickly react to the comment by Marcel by saying that even the fact that the Commission stepped in this space, even though of course it's restrained by the competencies, it has even the fact that it stepped in this space, we saw that it made a difference. Just the publication of the framework itself, even though it's a voluntary tool for uptake by organizations, can use it or not as they like, it really attracted a lot of attention. And I think it will make a difference. And I will conclude on a similar note that we need to keep into account the needs of adults, but now the future is young people, and we look forward to working on this new framework with the forward-looking angle, which is also the message of Global Money Week today. So all these issues are very much related. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kiara, and I completely agree with you. It made a big difference, and thank you to the OECD as well for being there for a long time on this topic. Maybe Charles, just a last word, a quick word. You're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. I want just to repeat one thing. We think in France that the very good way to include the private sector in the financial literacy is to coordinate with the national industry associations. We think it's the best way to manage conflict of interest and so on. So, and maybe if I can, I just want to show you the visual of France for the Global Money Weeks.
Nice.
This year, you know?
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Salvatore, very quick word.
Risk and return. Not
right.
Investing in financial education is a too high of risk for the next generation. Investing in it will provide and yield very high return for the companies, but also for the society in general.
Well done, thank you. And Natalie, last but not least.
I would say asset managers do have a key role to play. I think we take it very serious as corporates and at industry level, as this report shows. And I very much like also the action points, how we want to move it forward in the future. So we take our role very serious and continue to work on it hard.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. And I'd like to thank the speakers, EFAMA, the members of the platform, and of course the audience for joining us today. There's a lot of work to do, but I think it's a great opportunity, as was said. And I hope you find the second edition of the EFAMA Guidelines for Investor Education Initiatives useful. It will be, if it's not already, on the EFAMA website, and I hope it's an inspiration for you all. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye.